Hello. Can you guys hear me? Did I fix my audio issues from last week? Hey everyone. So welcome to the live stream yet again. We are back to the massive mic in front of my face. I'll natter a little bit before everyone else gets here. I have this little mic. This is the one I tried to use last week. It's just the plug it in and go, but for whatever reason I cannot get OBS to recognize this microphone. I just spent 20 minutes trying to troubleshoot what to do if OBS doesn't recognize a mic, and everything's just did you plug it, unplug it, and plug it back in again? I'm like, yes. So unfortunately we're back to this, which I believe I am using the correct. Yeah, okay, I'm using the right one. So at least the audio should be pretty good today. Oh, except that I forgot to get a copy of my own book to show you guys. Okay, hang on one second. I gotta grab it from my bookshelf. Sit tight. Okay. Too much stuff in here. All right. I got it. I knew I was gonna forget something. I always forget something. This time it was the fact that I am talking to you about the book, and I needed the book to talk about. Welcome in, everybody. I need a USB mic. I have one, but my USB mic died on me. I have this mic. This is my professional, proper podcasting mic. And yeah, I wanted something simple. I'm not good at this stuff, so I wanted something that would just be plug it in and go, ta-da! And I tried to do that, and then the ta-da never happened. So Pete is currently blocked by the mic, I think. Yeah, he's in the chair behind me. Let's do this. He's awake. He's looking at the wall. He's doing that typical cat thing of I'm up, but my eyes are still closed, and I don't really want to be up, but I might come bother the human. So yeah, we'll find out if he comes visit. I told him he's allowed to come visit. He's always allowed in the live streams, and anytime. Do I need to train Pete? Pete used to play fetch when he was a kitten, actually, in my 2 apartments ago. When I was doing my hair in the bathroom or something, there was a wall, and I could bounce the little bouncy soccer ball, Nerf ball thing off the wall, and he'd run into the next room and get it and bring it back. He was great at it. And then he stopped doing it. I think he outgrew fetch. It makes me very sad because, you never want them to grow up. So, yeah. Water is also good right now. Everyone stay hydrated. All right. So, let's go. Let's jump into things. This week, for those of you who are new, oh gosh, I just shook my entire desk. For those of you who are new and who've never seen one of these live streams before, and who are maybe new to the channel, which I still think is probably pretty rare, welcome. I'm Amy. I wrote this book, Fighting for Space, which came out 2 weeks before the world went into generally a full lockdown. So since I can't be out on a book tour right now, I am doing a book tour that is on my channel. My kind of philosophy with this is, instead of giving the same talk about the book in multiple locations around the country, I am giving different talks related to the book in the same location, being my desk, and you are all watching it on my YouTube channel. So welcome. This is the Vintage Space. Fighting for Space, for those of you who do not know, is I'll read. I always feel bad. I have to read my own subtitle every time. 2 pilots and their historic battle for female spaceflight. It is, in essence, the story of these 2 women, Jackie Cochran and Jerry Cobb, both successful pilots. Jackie being the most incredible pilot of all time. Were both kind of at the center of the question of, should women fly in space in the 1960s? Going to pause for a second. Daniel Balkwell, thank you so much for that donation. I really appreciate it. If we ask a question, should we use a question mark emoji? I mean, it would stand out a little bit better, to be honest, against all the text that's scrolling up in my little chat window. So if you want to use the emoji, go for it. I'll try to see those questions better. I don't know how that would work, but we'll try. So today, every week, in the description below this video, there should be a list of past broadcasts that I have done, each one kind of going into one facet of the book, kind of exploring something or getting into things that weren't fully explored in the book because, even though this thing is a little bit huge, still things weren't able to get in there. Today, we're going to be discussing what men thought of the idea of women in space in the 1960s. So before we do that, I am actually going to I'm going to give you guys like a brief rundown of kind of what happens in here, just in case you're new here, haven't read it, or just want a refresher. We'll do this. So it's like subtle product placement. It's not subtle at all. So Fighting for Space is, I feel like I should say, a very true story. It is a work of narrative nonfiction, so everything in it is true, down to the dialogue, which is all taken from interviews or memoirs or conversations that were recorded. And it's effectively a dual biography of Jackie and Jerry. We start with Jackie. She's the elder of the two, born in 1906. Learned to fly as an adult. Her backstory is incredible. I would recommend watching the live stream I did about Bessie Pittman if you want to know Jackie's backstory, because it's an amazing story. She's awesome. I have so much Jackie stuff, including her signed memoir right here on my desk. So Jackie didn't grow up around planes, didn't really grow up around that influence at all. She learned to fly as an adult in 1932, got her license in 3 weeks, which is like insane, actually less than 3 weeks, 17 days. And once she learned to fly, she decided that this was what she wanted to do. She was going to be a star aviatrix. That was it. She quit her job at the time. She was working in a beauty parlor, and by the end of the decade had won the Bendix Transcontinental Air Race, had won the Collier Trophy, the Harmon Trophy, was friends with like all the high-ranking military generals you could imagine, including Hap Arnold, had met Randy Lovelace, was friends with Lyndon Johnson, who was at the time a new congressman, and all of that led to her having a very good position in the beginning of the Second World War that allowed her to actually be the woman to not only get, this is the bad pun, get the WASPs off the ground, the Women's Air Force Service pilots, but to lead them as well. So she was the woman who led the first kind of ever wave of women military pilots in the Second World War. Post-war, she ran for Congress and lost. Became the first woman to break the sound barrier with Chuck Yeager on her wing, and did all kinds of awesome things. Thing to note of Jackie is she was married to Floyd Bostwick Odlum, not a name that is familiar to many, but he is one of the robber barons who built America. He was one of the richest men in the country before the Depression, and actually came out of the Depression with more money. So they had not only influence and power, they had wealth that came with its own influence and power. So they were really the power couple to end all power couples. And within this kind of, I've actually had a friend of mine described reading this book as it's like Jackie's world and everyone else is a player in it. So within Jackie's world stumbles Jerry Cobb. Jerry, 25 years younger, was a career pilot as well. She grew up around planes. There's a motorcycle out there. I don't know if you guys can hear it. Bye, Bob. Thanks for coming and hanging out for a minute. Jerry grew up around planes. Her dad learned to fly in the Second World War, actually had a plane so that he could get more practice hours in, and taught her. She sort of found as many little things that she could do to get flying time, including like her gym teacher in high school. Taught lessons in a small plane and encouraged her to continue flying. I mean, all of these things kind of added up to kind of making it such that when she became an adult in her early 20s, there was no question about it that she was going to fly for a living, which she did. And she ended up being in the right place at the right time to take the same medical exams that the Mercury astronauts did a year later. So the men took the exams in 1959, Jerry took them in 1960. And then this is where things get really interesting, because Randy Lovelace, the man who ran the medical testing, who was a good friend of Jackie Cochran, and a good friend of Floyd Odlum. Floyd was the chairman of the board of the Lovelace Foundation and also bankrolling the clinic, so they're very involved. Randy Lovelace announces that a woman has passed the medical tests given to the astronauts, and then the media's like, there's a woman astronaut. And then it becomes this like massive she said, and played out very much in the media, and that's basically like the second half. Yeah, about like the second half of the book is all about kind of how that happened, how that all kind of everyone's perspective that came in as more women joined the fray, kind of what their perspectives were, what their roles were. Going to pause for a quick second. Kevin, thank you so much for that donation. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for your kind words. And Dragon Launch. I should be more aware of the launches. But I'm not, because in my head it's 1960. This is the weird thing about when you work in history, is that it's hard to remember that, like, it's not actually 1960 or 1938, depending on what element of this I'm going into. But thank you, Kevin, very much. And thank you for being here week after week. I do keep seeing your name a lot. So Jerry and Jackie kind of go head to head in this. I kind of describe it as like they're trying to control a female spaceflight program that didn't exist. You've heard of the Mercury 13. This whole thing is basically like, without telling you why the Mercury 13 is not a real group, it's not a real name. None of that is the real story at all. And as they're kind of playing this out, of course they are playing this whole issue of them trying to figure out what to do with a woman in space program, if anything at all, happens against the backdrop of NASA figuring out how to go to the moon. So NASA's perspective is incredibly important in this narrative, which is why there's like a huge amount of space history in here. Of course, it's also me, so of course you're going to get space history. But NASA in a way kind of stands for the male dominant society of the time, because it kind of was. And that's where a lot of the weird perspectives, or not weird, but like actually a lot of them are very like spot on for 1960, 1961. A lot of the interesting perspectives of what the men thought about women astronauts come into play in the book. So I want to kind of go through that a little bit, because in part it's really easy to look at a story like this and cry sexism, because our modern standpoint, that's what it would be. But it's very different when you take it in historical context. And I'm seeing you guys bring up like the 2 or 3 women that people know, being Nancy Grace Roman, Margaret Hamilton, and Katherine Johnson. There were women who were involved in the space program. So maybe this is a good place to start. There were women who were involved in the space program. I just named 3 of them. They were women who were working more behind the scenes. And the issue for Jerry... Yeah, right here. The issue for Jerry was really that she wanted to be on par with the astronauts. So the way I kind of describe the space program, the vintage era, Apollo era at NASA, is it's not just a bunch of guys going to the moon. It's like a giant iceberg, and the 3 guys on a mission, or the 7 guys that are the Mercury astronauts, are the tip of this massive iceberg. I mean, 400,000 people worked to help get the Apollo missions on the moon. I mean, that's contractors, subcontractors, subcontractors. There's a huge number of people, many of whom were women. But all the visible part of that was the astronauts. And Jerry wanted to be the visible part of that. She wanted to have that be what set her apart. And that's why when she had the chance to take the medical tests, and when the media started calling her the first female astronaut, the first woman qualified to fly in space, started using this verbiage about her, she didn't correct any of it. She really let that happen because I think she really wanted to force NASA to make a call to have this almost be like a propaganda showing that you can have women flying alongside men just like you can in airplanes. Why not in space as well? And she wanted women to be visible, but more than that, she wanted her to be the visible woman. She wasn't really interested in equality for women so much as equality for Jerry. And this is really interesting because if you read this and the more you get into Jackie, I mean, Jackie was equality for Jackie. So these 2 women that are like not getting along and not agreeing about women in space are have that like disagreement largely because they are both super self-interested. Let's not pretend they weren't. So that's kind of that's an element of it, but we kind of have to take it within historical context because it's not just a question of sexism in early 1960s. To say that is I think incredibly anachronistic, is to take what it is to be feminist as a modern standpoint and apply it to the early 1960s, which you can't do, because to be a feminist meant something very different in the early 1960s than it does now, and meant something very different in the early 60s than it does in the late 60s. I talk a little bit about kind of the changing definition of the word feminism in the introduction, because I actually have 3 women in here say, I am not a feminist, which when you're talking about something like this and you take it to be an incredibly feminist story, to have your 2 main women and another one say, I am not a feminist, is like, wait, what? To be a feminist in the early 1960s, before the second wave of feminism and women's liberation, was actually considered akin to being a communist, which is, when I learned that, I was just like, this is so weird, but I kind of get it. I mean, like, within, historical context, of course. I don't actually get it as like a defense against feminism. The idea was American idealism as it was presented in the 1960s was all about, or the early 1960s, so coming out of the late 1950s, was all about women taking care of the men at home. So the idea was, the women helped with the war effort, building planes, flying non-combat roles. They did all these things. And largely, these women were able to fly in the war because it was under the guise of helping the men. So women flying at home freed up men for the more dangerous and necessary and arguably more glamorous combat roles. Once the men came home, the women were also expected to go home. They weren't expected to continue helping with the workforce. So the women, this political narrative, I mean, this is just the American propaganda narrative. It was, Rosie the Riveter, who was inspiring women to start working and serving their country, was all of a sudden telling women that their job was now in the home. And that was represented there was a shift in the tone of advertising, the shift in government campaigns, a shift in the way kind of even products were designed. All of a sudden it was not technology to help America, it was technology to help the American housewife. The ultimate goal for women now was supposed to be to take care of the men and to take care of the home, because he was home from war and that was your new job. To do anything that broke away from that was akin to supporting a different ideal of life order, which was what communism was relative to democracy in the late 1950s and the early Cold War, right? So American democracy is threatened by communism. America's way of life is this woman at home, man working, 2.5 children and a dog and a white picket fence. Anything that goes against that is akin to communism. So being a feminist and wanting to work and wanting to not just be the housewife actually was seen as being as bad as declaring yourself a communist. So it becomes this really interesting thing of how to deal with all these women who are extremely strong personalities, many of whom, one of the women in here, Janie Hart, was a career pilot. Her husband was a senator. She had 8 children, and she also desperately wanted to be one of the first women in space. So these women who, as much as they kind of fell into the traditional role, also eschewed those traditional roles. How to deal with those women when you can't call them feminists it's kind of an interesting way to have to think of the question and the problem. So within that framework, it's kind of understandable, like, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. It's like we know that this is kind of the stereotype of the early 1960s, is men not wanting women in the workforce. So on the one hand, there are a lot of women who fell in, there's a lot of men who fell into that sort of standard way of approaching the question of women in the workforce. Kind of gets worse with women in space, which is something super elite. So on the one hand, yes, it's very typical of the era, but on the other hand, it's shocking. There were some examples of it that were quite shocking to me. So let's go through a little bit. There's actually some letters that I put in the book that I really want to read to you guys. So I'm going to quickly bring them up here. Because when I was looking through and I was researching for this book, not only was I interested in what the women had to say and what NASA had to say, there's this amazing thing in presidential archives with, if you've ever emailed, or, well, not emailed at this point, but if you've ever sent a letter to a presidential archive, like the LBJ archive. If you ever wrote LBJ a letter as vice president or president, that letter is now in the archives, which is awesome because there's letters from little kids like inspired by space, just like sending, you know, when you're a kid and you draw a rocket and then your mom's like, that's really sweet, honey, let's send it into the president. Well, guess what, little Timmy, that that drawing of a rocket that you did when you were 6 is in a presidential library. Oh, I wish I had it handy right now, but I actually did find a picture of the moon landing as drawn by some 7-year-old that was in the Nixon library. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. So there were a lot of letters that came from just random people kind of in the community, in the world, who were voicing their very vocal opinions on women in space at the time. So I'm going to start with the kind of everyman. One of the first letters that I found, I loved this letter. I tried to find out if it was a real person. It's not. It was the name on this letter was A. Bachelor, and I was like, tell me it's a guy named Anthony. Tell me it's a real person that I can discover. It was not. It was just A. Bachelor. But this was kind of interesting. I found this letter in the LBJ library, and it was written. I just mentioned this woman, Janie Hart, who had 8 kids, but who also was a career pilot, wanted to fly in space. So because she was a senator's wife, when she was starting to get more vocal in the newspapers about wanting to promote women in space, she made headlines. Like this was big news. A senator's wife and the mother of his 8 children, oh, so that's so many children, wants to be an astronaut. So A. Bachelor wrote a note to LBJ when he was vice president on hotel stationery. And that letter is in the archives. It's written in pencil, so it's like, I'm worried it's going to fade over time, but I have copies of it now. He wrote, I have just seen in the newspaper that a senator is going to blast his wife out into space, underlined. This is a hell of a way to get rid of one's wife. It's getting bad enough with women being the way they are. It's getting so a man can't go anywhere without having a woman hanging around. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't hate them. I just want to put them back in their place, underlined, in the home where she belongs. I know that your judgment on this will be sound. I had this feeling when I voted for you. I will be looking for your answer in the newspaper. Such a weird note. First of all, I think that's a weird thing to write to a sitting vice president, personally, having never written to my Congress people or anyone else in government. But that letter, Mr. A. Bachelor, is in perpetuity in a presidential archive as part of the station's history. And I love that letter because I think it really sums up nicely. And I actually put it, let me see if I can actually find it in here. It's one of the letters we included a copy of because it was so good. To me, that one really beautifully sums up not only the expected, like what people expect men to say about women in space of the era, but kind of the general, like, it's the most typical misogynistic tone of the 60s. Like, it's played up, I'm just trying to think of period dramas I've seen lately. I tried watching Mad Men again recently, and I can't get into the second season, but that typical misogyny that's just like oozing around everything in that show, like that's summed up in this letter. But what's interesting is he's a bit of an outlier because for every one of him, there's one person who's saying that they really enjoy the idea of having qualified humans in space. I want to find this letter because then I can show you guys his handwriting. No, I can't find it. Well, we'll do this later. Anyways, so that was one of them. So that was kind of like, I was entirely unsurprised to find that as the letter coming from the everyman. I mean, literally, A. Bachelor is the everyman. But it gets stranger. I found it really strange when there were a lot of letters from within NASA that actually had the same tone. And I always find it a little bit shocking when it's kind of the men of science, the men who are, even of the era, the men of science who understand the fact that humans are humans, having that approach. So Randy Lovelace. Let's talk about Randy Lovelace for a quick second. Let's find the picture of Randy Lovelace, just in case you guys don't know what he looks like. Randy Lovelace was the doctor who did here we go. Sorry, I know I have OBS working now and I can share a thing, but I don't know how to do that. I didn't get my picture set up. So here's Randy Lovelace. That's not in good focus at all. And there he is standing behind Jackie shaking hands with President in 1939, 1940. So Randy Lovelace is the doctor that NASA asked to do the medical testing for its first wave of astronauts. Now, he was not affiliated with NASA at all. He was a private citizen who had his own clinic, like I said, funded by Jackie's husband, Floyd Odlum. And NASA asked him to do it because he was known to be extremely thorough. He was one of the grandfathers of aviation medicine. He was also known to be very discreet. So he was someone that NASA could trust to do a very, very thorough examination medically of all of the candidates and not leak anything to the press. So it was really Randy Lovelace's project to start with. So we're going to pause for a quick second. Madness 88. Really enjoy the discussions. Love reading, then hearing about what you researched. Thank you so much, Madness, and thank you for that donation. I really do appreciate it, and I'm glad you're enjoying my little rant today. So Randy Lovelace was doing this because he was medically curious. That had driven his entire career, was really about medical curiosity. He actually did some early parachute jumps himself because he was curious. I mean, there's a lot to be said for Randy Lovelace. And when he was curious about testing women, when he tested Jerry Cobb in 1960, it actually wasn't because he wanted to sort of start taking on a social justice campaign to right wrongs facing women. He didn't want to do it for the sake of creating balance between the genders. He did it because he was medically curious about what would happen to a woman in space. And I think that's a really important thing to note, and very interesting that for him, I don't think, and everything reading about him as much as I could, he passed away in 1965, so is his life being cut short? There's no way to kind of get in certain things I haven't been able to find answers to yet. I think a lot of it was that he wasn't unaware that looking into the role of women in space wouldn't have repercussions or wouldn't do something significant for women. It was more that he wanted significant data, and that this was an offshoot of getting more data. Pausing for a second, the Casual Spaceman, thank you so much for that donation. I will always support female astronauts being in the forefront of space exploration and think the next human on the moon should be a woman. We'll talk about that at the end. I'm going to write that down. So Randy Lovelace is not doing any of this because he wants to right wrongs. He's doing it because he wants data. And that, I think, is significant because for him, it was always just a medical program. I can't write and talk at the same time. So for Randy Lovelace to do this whole medical testing on Jerry and then on other women, he's not doing it for any reason beyond science. And, quickly, Michael Sullivan, with your donation, thank you so much for that. And also, hello. That's the Star Trek thing that I can't do. So Randy Lovelace is not doing it to right wrongs for women, but he is shocked, and he does write about in letters that I was able to find in researching the book. When he shares his data with other NASA scientists who are also biologists, who are doctors, who understand the medical interest in looking at female astronauts, the medical interest of not even considering them seriously as astronauts, but just doing the medical tests to understand female baselines, whatever it is. He sent his data to some other NASA scientists, and even they had shocked by this because how do scientists not want data points? Had no interest in the data points. There was one, Clark Rant, who was director of NASA's Office of Life Science Programs, wrote Randy a letter in, what's the date here? In September of 1960 saying, "Oh, your research is really interesting, but I don't see any value in testing women." And then he actually wrote, and I quote, "Perhaps I am just one of the old school who favors keeping them barefoot and pregnant!" Exclamation point. So I find it sort of interesting that this is this sort of like stereotypical, almost like parody of sexism that you see in TV shows and in the media from the 60s. Again, like, obviously, guys, I wasn't around, so I don't know how real any of the sort of media portrayals are. But that it's so, like, perfectly encapsulated in a letter from a NASA scientist who doesn't even see the value of getting data points from other people. It's just sort of like, I question that. I question that as like, aren't you curious? Or don't you even just like want to know? So there was a lot of that. There was definitely a lot of that. There were other women who were, there were other men who were interested in women. Don Fleckinger, who was an Air Force, flight surgeon, that's the phrase I'm looking for, who was an Air Force flight surgeon who actually had wanted to do a female spaceflight program and research on women as potential astronauts at the Air Force, but was shut down. He was super on board to understand the data, understand the data points for, you know, at some point you're going to need women in space, and was shut down. But there was a lot of people within NASA who were just sort of like, no, I'm not interested in this. And it became this question, and I kind of like, this is more of like the thought process that I didn't get in the book, because my book is not, you know, me editorializing for 432 pages. But like, it's just nuts to me that like the organization that is headed up by people who are like exploring things and breaking out into the unknown and doing all this for humanity are just like, I'm not even interested in other data points. Like, I find the lack of foresight shocking, especially because, as we know, eventually the whole goal was eventually to colonize space, and it's still to colonize space. And as we're going to get to this hearing in a second, but as we hear in the Congressional subcommittee hearing that this book kind of comes to a climax with, they're talking about, like, if we're going to colonize space, we're going to need women, right? Like, why, like, how were they like, we need women in space, but also I don't care. Like, it was such a weird, these things just like don't line up. We are going to pause for a quick second. Colt Odell, thank you so much for that donation. Am I excited for Starship's first flight? What are your thoughts on Elon Musk and the space industry? Elon Musk, I've talked about Elon Musk a bit. We're not going to get into that today, unless I feel ranty in the question section. But I do have something on private space that I'm working on for down the line a bit. And Eric Hopper, thank you so much for that donation as well. I so appreciate your support. Oh, it went off the screen. I'm for women's equality and agree that gender roles women and men had are stifling and too rigid. I'm definitely not a feminist of any kind and agree about those people from the 50s about it being awful. Feminism is definitely a hard thing to describe, and I'm not going to sit here. I'm not a feminist scholar, guys. Not going to pretend. And I think feminism is a very hard word to define in a lot of times, because you will get people on extremes who, yeah, it gets messy. I'm not going to tell you whether or not to call yourselves a feminist. Do you. Just, you know, be kind to humans. All humans are good. All humans have a lot to offer. All humans. So yeah. There's this really, so it's you're getting this from the man on the street, a bachelor, is just like, stop it. Scientists within NASA don't even care. And it's not even, what was interesting about the NASA scientists is they're not saying, I don't want women in space because we're overburdened trying to get men into orbit right now. So remember, all this is happening before Al Shepard has even gone up. So this is like we're trying to figure out how to get a rocket to go up without blowing up someone. Can we not have more things that are up for question right now? Colt Adele, thank you again for that donation. And yes, thumbs up. I will be talking about private space once I'm done the virtual book tour. That's coming. So it's not only coming from that, but it's coming from the scientists who should be exploring all things with the goal of like humanity in space. But instead, it's getting into this. I just don't want women involved. Like, this isn't for any reason beyond I just don't want women involved. And it's sort of like, oh, well, that's a thing. So what about the astronauts? Because I want to get into this hearing a little bit. Let me find this. I need to find. I've got quotes I want to read here. Oh, I put them in another doc. I was organized on this one. So the astronauts are kind of another story. These women were in the media enough, and Jerry was really, really vehement. She was like literally pounding the pavement, knocking on doors in Washington, trying to get anyone who was at all connected to the space agency to listen to her, to plead her case to have a woman in space. And her whole thing became, like I said, it was fairly self-serving. Her whole thing was to be the first woman in space so America could score a win over the Soviet Union. It wasn't really about breaking barriers so much as it was about her going into space. Jackie very much had the same thing. So the two of them are fighting about what to do with this. Jerry wants to be the woman. Jackie wants to run a large research program on women because she's too old and medically unfit to go herself. If Jackie had been younger, the poll she had, she could have been the first space tourist. Like, she could have bought her way up if she really wanted to. Oh yeah, sidebar, Floyd, her rich husband, his big company was the Atlas Corporation, started in the 1920s. And yeah, owned Convair, the Atlas missile. Yeah, he could have bought her a ride on that rocket, potentially, if she was of age. Quan, I can't see the rest of your name potentially, but thank you so much for that donation and also just riding on a rocket. Awesome. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your support, and I'm glad you're here. So once we get into, these are the kind of general perspectives for every, like I said, there were a lot of people who were writing into LBJ when he was vice president, because he was also head of the Space Council at the time. I should make that clear. So LBJ was VP and head of the Space Council, so everything in space was really going through him, and that was a calculated decision on Kennedy's part. He didn't really want to deal with space because he didn't really care, and figured if things go right, then he gets credit. If things go wrong, he can blame his VP. So LBJ was really the one that everyone was appealing to, and a ton of people were writing LBJ letters saying, let these women have a chance. There's like huge piles of these things in the library, and I got to go through all of them and kind of find that it's not a clean division that women are writing to him in support of women in space. There were actually women writing in saying they didn't think women should go into space because they didn't want to have their lives disrupted. I mean, it was really interesting spread of things, a lot of them from kids, a lot of them from adults, and it was really split kind of 50-50 on yay and nay women in space, and it wasn't split by gender at all. So how did the astronauts come into this? Because while all this is going on, the Mercury astronauts are not only sort of like the overnight instant celebrities in the country, like they're the new rock stars. Like they haven't done anything as astronauts yet, but volunteer for a position and pass some exams, and everyone wants a piece of them, and their sort of seat at the top of, to borrow the term from Tom Wolfe, the top of the pyramid, is being threatened potentially by these women saying that they are just as qualified and that they are as deserving as a flight into space. So it really comes together, like I said, in this Congressional subcommittee hearing that was in July of 1962. And the hearing was broken into 2 days. The first day was the women, so it was Janie Hart, the senator's wife with 8 kids, and Jackie Cochran. Jerry and Janie, oh god, all of their names are J's, and it trips me up every time. Janie and Jerry were obviously in support of having women start flying right away, having women immediately join the astronaut corps, fly alongside the men. Jackie towed the NASA line, had actually cleared her testimony with everybody, and said that she did not believe that women should be fast-tracked into space. And what Jackie was actually right on was that the state of kind of women's rules at the time, if the Atlas had blown up with John Glenn on board, we know that there was a statement in place, space is hard, he gave his life for his country, all that stuff. It would have been a fault of the machine. If that same rocket had blown up with a woman on board, it would have been, well, the woman is the reason it didn't work. She did something wrong, and that fault, even if it had nothing to do with the pilot, the Mercury spacecraft was almost entirely automated. If a woman had been on board and something had gone wrong, it could have delayed women's progress more than it already was. So Jackie, in a way, really understood that you had to play the game to have that, to be taken seriously in the male-dominant fields, because she'd been doing it so much longer, whereas Jerry had kind of badgered her way into things the entire time. So yeah, there's a lot kind of going on in the nuances of how they're both trying to approach it. And once the astronauts are kind of dragged into the fray, it was John Glenn and Scott Carpenter were the 2 astronauts who testified on the second day of this Congressional subcommittee hearing. And they both had some interesting choice words about women in space. So John Glenn said, when he opened his testimony saying, "First, let me preface my remarks by one statement. I am not anti any particular group. I am just pro-space. Anything I say is towards the purpose of getting the best qualified people of whatever sex, color, creed, or anything else they might happen to be." And as the panel was quick to point out, he was not against women. He was married. Of course, we just lost Annie Glenn, which is a heartbreaking loss in itself, guys. John Glenn and Annie Glenn met when they were 3 and 4 years old, and they were together for like 73 years. They're like the sweetest couple ever, but they had long fulfilled lives, I think. It's still a loss. But anyways, we're not going to be sidetracked by John Glenn having a wife. But they point out John Glenn is not anti-women. He has a wife. He has a daughter. And his whole testimony, John Glenn's whole testimony, eventually kind of became, even if this was kind of where he was thinking, I think it just kind of came out really wrong. He echoed the NASA line that flying in space is experimental, that you needed a certain amount of technical skill, and the women just didn't have that technical skill. The women in this case being Jerry Cobb and the other women that were sort of in line had done the medical testing. And we talked about astronaut qualifications last week, 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we talked about astronaut qualifications. And we went through it that, yeah, the women were not qualified. So I think John Glenn actually makes a lot of sense in this instance when he's saying he's not against people, he's pro-space, but the only people who are qualified to fly in space as per NASA's regulation is us. Him being the Mercury 7, not me. So, the stance is space is hard. We need the right people to do it. Of course, I would urge you, highlights are in here, but the testimony does get incredibly sexist in tone after a while. It gets pretty messy. Where's the other one? There's another quote that I want to read for this. Oh, where is it? Okay, so yeah, here I'm going to read a tiny little excerpt from the book here, largely quoting John Glenn, because I think everything we've talked about a little bit today with, the public and NASA having different feelings on not wanting women involved versus the reality that the women were not technically proficient and up to the task as per NASA's needs in 1962. Again, we're keeping it within, obviously, we're not taking this out of context. Okay, so John Glenn. I would like to add on this physical examination program, the program run out there for some of the women at Albuquerque. John jumped in. I think sometimes in the papers and magazines, the write-ups on this have been a little misleading, he offered. I think the tests mainly are those to see if there's anything wrong with a person physically. It isn't that it qualifies anybody for anything. It just shows that they are a good, healthy person. A real crude analogy might be, we have the Washington Redskins football team. My mother could probably pass the physical exam they give preseason for the Redskins, but I doubt if she could play too many games for them. You picked a bad team, Congresswoman Jessica Weiss replied playfully. Maybe she could. So that unfortunately got taken really badly out of context in the media that ensued after the hearing. Another one that kind of I think is a little bit evasive, but an interesting thing to note. John Glenn was asked, if you're going to the moon, why would you not want a woman as good company on that trip? To which he said, I am not looking for company. I am looking for the best qualified person to do the job at hand. So, I mean, I would agree with that statement. I think, again, we're down to the question of astronaut qualifications. Here's another one that I like. Okay. I'm going to backtrack just in case you guys missed it. I feel like I need to just spell this out really clearly. The women at the time, Jerry Cobb had, I forget how many hours she had in the air. She had, probably over 10,000 hours in the air herself when she flew, but she'd only ever flown propeller planes. She'd never flown a high-speed jet. She'd never flown anything experimental. She had done, I think her top speed at the time was a little over 300 miles per hour, whereas all of the men had extensive jet test experience. It was one of NASA's requirements. They had fewer hours in the air, but those hours demanded a lot more out of them. And the reason NASA went with jet test pilots was because things were happening really fast in space, and they needed people who could respond really quickly and people who could keep a cool head when things were going really crazy, really fast in space. the best equivalent at the time was thought to be a military test pilot. And that excluded women because women were not cleared to fly with the U.S. Air Force. So that's why the women were not qualified based on any of their skills, no matter how many hours they'd flown. So Jerry's argument this entire time had been, well, I've flown more hours than you have, therefore I'm more qualified than you are. And here John Glenn is saying, well, just because you're medically fit doesn't mean you have my experience. So the analogy I like to give is, I drive, well, I don't have a commute because I work from home, but if pretend in this alternate universe for a second, I have an office job and I'm commuting 30 minutes a day in my Honda Civic. I don't have a Honda Civic. Nothing against Honda Civics. That's always the car that I think of. I don't know why. So I'm commuting an hour a day in my Honda Civic. And then all of a sudden I decide that because I can pass the same medical exam, I don't know if they do this, but they give medical exams to a Indy 500 driver, that all of a sudden I think I can drive in the Indy 500. I definitely can't. I definitely do not know how to react fast enough behind a wheel to not die doing that. I don't know how to negotiate other drivers on the road driving at those speeds. I don't know how to manage cars that are far more demanding than my little Honda Civic. So this is kind of what Jerry's whole argument is. I've flown more hours, therefore I'm just as qualified as you. And the men are saying, but you're not. So Scott Carpenter actually spoke to this. I feel that this analogy might be valid. A person can't enter a backstroke swimming race and by swimming twice the distance in a crawl qualify as a backstroker. I believe there is the same difficulty in the type of aviation experience that 35,000 hours provides a civilian pilot in the experience a military test pilot receives. So the men, when the astronauts are kind of testifying in this congressional subcommittee hearing, they're not being overtly sexist like A Bachelor was. They are instead kind of defaulting to the technical requirements, which is also the stance NASA took. And I think it's really hard to say how much NASA was, uninterested in dealing with women because it didn't want to deal with women. Didn't want to deal with women because it wasn't ready to start taking on something that was kind of new and challenging. This is, again, space was so male dominated. There were women who were behind the scenes. We're going to get to them in a second. But they, maybe didn't want to have to publicly take on, being the trailblazer in another arena, being sort of more open, public, balancing between genders. So for whatever reason, NASA really took the line of, technically speaking, this is just not something that we are willing to do right now. We cannot take these people out. So John Glenn, years later, so this, I have to give a plug to my friend Francis French. I'm sure many of you guys know his name. I actually just put up my interview with him like 2 days ago. He wrote this book. I referenced this book, Into This Silent Sea. Just get it without the reflection of my light. Fantastic book. He's a brilliant writer. And he has a chapter in here that's all about the women. It's called The Two Wallies, being Wally Funk and Wally Schirra. Wally Schirra, of course, was the Mercury astronaut. Wally Funk was one of the women who took the medical tests and was super gung-ho about flying in space. She actually applied to fly as an astronaut twice after NASA started allowing women, but she never had the qualifications and then was too old. But it's Francis, in interviewing people for this book, recounted that John Glenn was actually like really annoyed at the way that his comments from the Congressional Subcommittee hearing were taken afterwards, because he thought that from the public, he felt that in years later, he was personally held responsible for not having women flying in space in the 60s, as though like he was magically the decider at NASA because he was the most publicly available, publicly recognizable person. So he was kind of irked by that. He was frustrated by the whole thing, that it became this much of an issue, that he was personally held responsible. Like, he had no bearing on anything. None of the astronauts had anything to do with the astronaut qualifications beyond meeting them. The ultimate decisions came from Eisenhower, really, because he was worried about letting crackpots into the space program and wanted some kind of guideline about who was qualified, and said military test pilots would be secure and have all the right stuff you need, but also like background checks available. That when that decision was made in 1958, that is what disallowed women until NASA changed its requirements. Then it was like, well, this is working for us. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, kind of thing. So John Glenn, years and years later, I think this book, this came out in the 90s. We're going to check the date really fast. 2007. Oh, I don't know why I thought it was older. In the 2000s, he was still irked by how he was represented in connection with the issue of women in space. Wally Schirra apparently was like super annoyed by the women, I learned from Francis. I never met Wally Schirra. I love that people, my middle name being Schirra, people are always like, are you related to Wally Schirra? And I'm like, well, except for the fact that we spell and pronounce our names differently. Yes, it's a Simpsons reference some of you may get. So Wally Schirra was like really annoyed. Like, he was really personally hated that these women were coming out and saying my 10,000 hours flying little puddle jumpers, little the effectively commuter planes, these little prop planes, like, I did that, therefore I'm as good as you with your high speed jet flying experience, and you've managed to not die. And he's like, no, you can't fly as good as me. So yeah, that's, the men had some different opinions on it. Wally Schirra being more outspoken. Scott Carpenter actually felt bad about what he said years later, felt bad about what he said in that congressional subcommittee hearing. He felt that he had been a little bit too harsh on the women, recognizing, however, that the women did not meet NASA's requirements and that there was nothing any one of them could do about it. He felt that he should have maybe spoken out in support of them a little bit more, if only almost as a showing of good faith. He felt that it could maybe have helped them on their journey, maybe get something going for them, but it was unclear how much he kind of took back. And I did actually meet Scott Carpenter. Did not ask him about that. He was one of the first astronauts I met, and I was like way too literally starstruck. So yeah. The male astronauts were like strangely held responsible for the decision to keep women out of space, even though the decision that kept women out of space was made years before any of them were officially, at least a year before any of them joined the space program, and they had no bearing on anything. So yeah, NASA was pretty irked by the whole thing too, because Jerry was running around saying that NASA was against women, and NASA had to keep saying, we're not against women. We are for the right people for the job, and we've decided who those right people are, given that we don't know anything about spaceflight right now. So it became this really like messy, it was just added another layer of mess to the whole like fray playing out extremely publicly. NASA actually had to go on the record many times saying that Jerry kept saying she spoke for NASA. Jerry was actually offered a consultancy with NASA in 1961, actually the day after Kennedy kind of proclaimed we're going to the moon. And she says she was the least consulted consultant of all time. There's no record at NASA that she was ever paid as a consultant. It seems like it was more a show of good faith by Jim Webb than anything, because he never really wanted to listen to her, or she kind of played her cards so poorly, and kind of rubbed everyone just the wrong way enough that they just didn't want to deal with her anymore, that she actually might have stood in her way more than helped herself. And a lot of that is kind of mirrored by NASA having to, or is supported by NASA having to say, she does not speak for us. She would give public talks saying she was a NASA consultant, saying she was speaking on behalf of NASA, and saying that NASA was against women. And then NASA had to go and send people to these conferences and have people speak directly after her saying, this woman does not represent us. We are not against women. We are pro getting our programs off the ground. So yeah, it was it's a very interesting thing. It's not a clean break at all. And it's interesting in looking through all this that the men were not like, uniformly pro or against women. I do think it's funny that Wally Schirra just like hated them, just like really hated them, because I don't know, reading, again, I've never met Wally Schirra. It just reads like he didn't like the challenge to his position. Kay Vanderstelt, thank you so much for that donation. Always great to hear your enthusiasm for the subject. Love the audiobook. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed the audiobook, where I speak a lot more slowly than I do when I'm kind of talking off the cuff like this. Okay, so how does this impact women kind of longer term with NASA? Well, we're not going to get into modern times because we're going to keep it kind of within the framework of the book. In the wake, Jerry kind of running around and this whole thing talking about how NASA was against women really like hurt NASA. I think not enough. I mean, the astronauts were so popular, had a relatively good publicity rating, even though like the approval rating of NASA was never great. Everyone thinks everyone loved NASA, but NASA had a 50% approval rating when Apollo 11 was orbiting the moon, so like it wasn't great. People didn't universally love NASA at all. Oh, I saw a question. What was Pete Conrad's opinion on women in space? I had nothing that I have been able to find. So this is one of those things that it's not like, okay, we're going to divert for a second because I do have an anecdote here. So, Hidden Figures. I assume you guys have read the book or seen the movie. Probably seen the movie more than read the book. You guys are readers. A lot of people ask me, why have we never heard of these women before? And I'm like, well, you have if you know how to look for them. But there's that scene where John Glenn refuses to fly until, I think it's Katherine Johnson. The women are actually composites of each other in a weird way based on the book. So I get them confused when I try to recall specifics from the movie. I've also only seen the movie once. So I think it's when he refuses to fly until Katherine Johnson checks the math. And that's a great moment. Except that you'd think if that had happened, she would be in his memoir. Well, not one of these women makes it into John Glenn's memoir. And I think that says a lot. I think the fact that Jerry Cobb does not make it in there, the congressional hearing does not make it in there. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's like, if it's in there at all, it's like, and then there was this issue with women. Like, it's not even a full sentence. It's like a clause. So I always think when you're researching for something like this, or anything, when you're doing anything, people can say a lot by what they don't say, and the lack of mentions of these women in the astronauts' memoirs. I mean, I've also read going back to high school days, not recently, but I've read almost all the astronauts' memoirs. They're not all fresh in my mind, but a lot of them just don't mention this. And I think that says more than if they had, because it shows how little it mattered to them, it registered for them. Interestingly, I mean, I kind of had the same feeling. Jackie's second memoir was published posthumously, and it's the one, I have it here. So Stars at Noon came out in 1954, obviously before the space age. Jacqueline Cochran is just it's her second memoir. It's pretty much the same, brings in some other voices, which is interesting. 6 pages in that book about space. That's how much it was like a diversion for her. It was not like she cared a lot, but it wasn't something she wanted to have kind of remembered with her name. Super quick, Marcus Langendorf, thank you so much for that donation. Hello, and the Casual Spaceman again. Interesting subject. Would love a chance to interview you and talk about your books on your YouTube channel. You can email, I think I have it's amytitleassistant@gmail.com. You can email there and I will see it. That's where I get all those things. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the book when you read it. So yeah, if the stories about the women being so important in John Glenn's launch were real, they'd be in there. So unfortunately, a lot of times the women were, as the movie is very aptly named, the hidden figures. Now, what NASA did after this congressional subcommittee hearing was actually start playing up the role of women, and it became a really interesting thing. And I don't get into it much in the book because it was just like, it was getting to the end. I had to wrap it up. It was also getting a little bit away from the main subject. So what NASA did was actually start really promoting the women who were involved in the space program, showing that there is a place for women. It's just not in the cockpit right now. And this is where Nancy Grace Roman becomes pretty much a household name judging by the number of times her name appears in magazines and newspapers. Dee O'Hara, who is probably a familiar name to a lot of you guys. I can't grab it, but I have a signed picture of her on my wall. She was the astronaut's nurse. She was very much promoted as, one of the women who was behind the scenes helping NASA. And it became this whole shifting narrative of instead of the media focusing on the men and what the men were doing, it started to be like, the men, here's the women who are getting everything off the ground. And they were looking at the computers, they were looking at the technicians, they were looking at the nurses, the doctors, all the people who were playing a massive role who just weren't super visible. So they all started kind of coming out of the woodwork, which is really interesting. And that really, this is something NASA continued doing into the 70s when it started actually opening the astronaut corps to women, when it started saying, okay, we can have pilots and mission specialists, because still women could not fly with the Air Force, and so did not meet the base requirements. So the whole thing really becomes, the issue, it just comes down to the issue of who's qualified and who wasn't. And a lot of the men who had the more sort of sexist, what we would now consider to be a very sexist position, a very anti-woman position, a lot of it was potentially hidden behind the I don't want to call it a veneer, but behind that wall of, well, it's all about qualifications. And some of them, like Dr. Rant at NASA, just straight up didn't want women around. So it became this interesting thing, and I tried to balance it and show both sides. But I think the most interesting thing, the kind of takeaway here about how the women thought about the men was a lot of them didn't. A lot of them didn't until they were asked about them. A lot of them were just sort of like, well, that's a thing. The astronauts were, more concerned with their training and with their upcoming missions. The NASA brass were more concerned about getting missions off the ground. The publicity people were more concerned about NASA's image. It was not something that a lot of people thought about until it was pushed in front of their faces. And Jerry did that, to her credit. She did get it in front of a lot of people's faces. Whether or not that was a good thing is still up for discussion. Well, I have some thoughts, but so yeah, that's my. I'm gonna sift through and I'm gonna see if we can find some questions. But yeah, what the men thought of the women was a lot of them didn't, but a lot of them were negative and a lot of them were ambivalent. It was strange. It was an interesting mix. I've got a couple of the letters. See if I can find this. I don't know. I want to try to find this. They're in here. We put letters inside, in breaking up the text, so I can never remember when exactly something happened to find the one thing that I'm looking for, because it's not the glossy picture pages are obviously easy to find. I'm flipping pages. This is really good viewing. I keep coming up to the same letter from Kay Cagle and Irene Leverton, and nope. Did I not include it? Maybe I only included it to my editor and we didn't end up putting it in the book. It's possible. In which case, I should maybe get organized. Organization has been tough, you guys, lately. Maybe I should actually put together some of these letters. Would you guys want to see a gallery of some letters? I think I can put some of them up. The ones from the LBJ library I know I can put up. It's always tough to get those things, but yeah, I included text of a lot of these letters in the book because I think it was really important to illustrate, just how much the opinions on women were varied and how much it was researching live, right? It's riveting. Just how much the opinions were varied, and I think it's really interesting that Randy Lovelace was at least from what I can see, from what I've been able to read, it's almost like he didn't really care. He cared about the people, which is what I think is so great. So someone, I forget who, I'm sorry, asked the question earlier, what I think about having, whether I think the next first person on the moon should be a woman. And honestly, I just think it should be the right person for the job. I think the more, this is my opinion, I think the more we sort of do an all-woman crew to show that women can do stuff is you're still making women other. Just stop highlighting the women on the crew. I know you kind of have to, but like just a group of people who are a crew because they are the best people for the job stops making it women as other, because then that just tells people that you can succeed as a woman, but you're always going to be other. And that, I don't think that helps anything. I think that's more frustrating than anything. Okay, I'm gonna sift through some questions and see what I'm sorry, guys. I'm so bad at finding all these things. I don't know how. I watch some streamers who can like read chat and talk, and I can't do that. I'm not good at that. I see some people, I know everyone, whenever there's anything women in space, people immediately bring up Margaret Hamilton. And unfortunately, guys, I'm still not a computers historian. I'm not good enough with the computer stuff. I can't break down exactly what she did beyond writing some of the code for the guidance computers. I can't explain it more than that, unfortunately. Oh, a bachelor's letter is on page 291. Did we put it in there? Thank you. Who was that? Who was that? Mr. Ofermod. Let's see. 291? This book got long, guys. Yeah, 291. Okay. Ah, it is in there. All right. From the Scoville Hotel. Let's see. There it is. There's his scrawly letter. I believe the only thing... Oh, yeah, and we even have the back page where it's just... Yeah, there it is. Oh, Grady Lee, thank you so much for that donation. I really appreciate it. Yeah, a bachelor. Okay, let's see. I'm going to grab some of these questions. Still throws me off that my chat is so delayed from the video when I look in the YouTube window. A matter of practice. I know I need to practice reading and talking at the same time, but it's not going to work. Well, quick question. How old is Pete? Pete is just turned 8, just over 8, which is really sad. He's not a kitten anymore, but he's my perpetual kitten. I believe this was Daniel just asked this, I think. How has/have Jackie and or Jerry inspired me dealing with inequality in my own life? I don't know. That's a good question. I think this is where Jackie's tough. We've talked about this. Jackie's a tough one. She's really self-serving. Like, we know that. She wanted to do a lot of things with her life. She had a lot of privileged positions. She was a fantastic pilot, but she had a ton of money at her disposal. I still love that she refused to let anybody not let her do something because she was a woman. And I think, to me, that's personally really inspiring. And I like that she was just like, stop it. Like, don't. Like, she refused to even have the conversation. But by the same token, would definitely, like, use her femininity when she needed to, i.e. selling cosmetics or showing that a woman could do something, to be like, you think I can't do this? I'll do it in a dress just because visually that'll matter more to you somehow. So I really like, and, you know, by the same token, as much as, you know, I always kind of say it's Team Jackie, Team Jerry, as much as I'm kind of Team Jackie. I love that Jerry like went as hard as she did on Washington trying to get someone to answer her questions. I think there's a lot to be inspired by both of them, just in terms of who they were and how much they wanted what they wanted in spite of being women at a time when women were like did not have opportunities to be who they wanted to be. So yeah, I think it's inspired me to just kind of, you know, do what I want to do, because I am people. People can do things, therefore I can do things. Like it's like the messy way of saying, like, we're all just humans, guys. Okay. Let's see. I saw another one. Oh, I did see someone ask if I'm going to do more interviews like the one I did with Francis. if I end up at a location where I have someone that I want to interview and can interview them really quickly, I will, but it's honestly not something that I frequently have people that kind of overlap with my content enough to do interviews. I'm also just not set up to do interviews. Like, the audio on that was so messy. I actually had to bump me up every time I spoke because Francis was wearing the lav and I couldn't get this one to work for my audio. It was kind of a mess. So, I'm not great at it. But maybe. Someone asked if the flags are still on the moon. They are, but they are probably sun bleached by now. I just went to the wrong screen. So yeah, it's they're definitely up there. Let's see if we've got anything else. Let me see. I'm going to bring a couple things over here, guys. Sorry. We're going to see if I can. I'm so sorry. I know you guys ask questions while I am talking, and unfortunately, I just don't see them quick enough to respond. Oh, your kitty is nearly 14 years old. Ugh, I want my kitty to be a perpetual kitty. I think I see what you just said, Daniel, and I think you may be right. Yeah. Let's see, aliens got him. Let's see. Oh, what do I want to see including the Right Stuff Disney adaptation that's not the movie? I don't know how I feel about that show. Oh. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up some stuff here, and none of my things are working right now. Oh, come on. Sigh. I should be better at technical stuff now, right? The Disney Plus Right Stuff show. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm gonna wait and see. But the first few things I've heard about it, my hopes are not overly high for it being any more accurate or correct than For All Mankind. Granted, it's not dealing in any alternate history stuff, but it is. I've heard that it's maybe not the most realistic by the book portrayal, so I don't know. I think it's truthfully, I think it's a bit of a strange move, because like the movie was so great, the book is so great. I don't know that we need to keep rehashing this stuff again. I don't know. I think I'm more excited for the Steve Carell show, Space Force. I think I love Steve Carell. I know some of the trailers have not looked brilliant. Some people have had kind of mixed feelings about it, but I think it's going to be so much more fun. I'm very excited about that show. So yeah, we'll see. Meta Vendetta, thank you so much for that donation. I really appreciate it. Okay. Let's see if we have any more. Star Trek or Star Wars? I've seen Star Wars, so I'll go with Star Wars. I've never actually watched enough Star Trek. I've tried it a couple times, and I just never really got into it. I really liked the original Star Wars trilogy when I was a kid, and then the episode 1 kind of ruined it for me. I've since seen all of them, but it's not something that I feel like I need to rewatch all the time. So, no, but I will say on the Star Wars, on Team Star Wars, if any of you get to Disneyland once it reopens, go to the Rise of the Resistance ride, because it's the most incredible experience. Waiting in line is awesome on that ride. So, yeah, that was I did the boarding gate, checking the time all day to see when our boarding group was called up, and it took 7-8 hours to get in there. It was so worth it. Go once Disneyland reopens. Let's see. Do you think we'll be back? Do I think we'll be back on the moon within 4 years? I have no idea. I'm actually working on something about lunar mission schedules. Coming up, so next week is the last episode or the last live stream for the virtual book tour, and then I'm going back to kind of longer form think pieces because I want to dig in. There's some stuff I just want to dig into and have fun with, and one of them is kind of this cycle of lunar mission proposals and timeframes. So we're gonna get into that. I don't know. I right now I don't see it I don't know. I have to go do some more digging about the actual state of some stuff, but then again, like when I look at these things, I look at NASA because NASA's public. I have no idea what Elon Musk has tucked away. He might just like roll something out one day and just like zoom himself to the moon. Who knows? It's Elon Musk. But maybe not anymore because he has a kid now and he wouldn't just like abandon his kid named A12 or something. Oh, my chat just totally failed. Okay, there we go. Grady Lee just asked, fighting for space screenplay. That is something that is, there's stuff happening with that, none of which I can talk about publicly yet, but, I promise as soon as something happens and I can talk about it, I'll talk about it. But yeah, that's a thing. That's a thing that's happening behind the scenes. That's all I'll say. Ta-da. Let's see. Oh, Eric Hopper, thank you for that donation. I saw it pop up, but then the chat scrolled past it. Thank you for that. I think that's a dog. Thank you so much for that donation. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you're enjoying the rant today. Favorite Apollo mission, Apollo 12. Come on now. I've got Pete Conrad, the action figure. Is he in focus? Come on, camera. Focus on him. Damn it. Focus on him. You can even see the gap in his teeth. Apollo 12. Pete Conrad, Albion, Dick Gordon, those guys had fun going to the moon. And that's what kind of made me realize that you can have it's human stories. So you could do something in science and tech that wasn't just straight up dry science and tech. You could make it human and fun. Okay, let's see if we've anything else. I see a lot of Apollo 10. Okay. Okay, I think I'm not seeing too many more. Oh, I see one. Have I considered merchandise cooperations in the future? Like the Vintage Space merch. Guys, I'm not good enough at creating designs for stuff to do it. I had Vintage Space t-shirts for a while. I don't even remember how they were done. I don't think they sold super well, but I had a dinosaur design that I really liked. I mean, if maybe it's not something that I'm putting serious thought into, to be totally honest. I've tried it a couple times. It's never really worked too well. Did I see the ABC TV movie called Plymouth? Pete Conrad was in it. No, but I've heard about this. I've heard about this one where it's like some lunar mission or some space mission, and he's the TV commentator on it. I've found it. I haven't actually seen it. I have all these bad space movies I want to watch, like Cats from Space, which is a Disney movie. So it's on Disney Plus. I'm going to watch it. Oh, there was another one that I just forgot about. There's some really good bad space movies. I watched Plan 9 from Outer Space not too long ago. I guess actually a while ago now. Which I only wanted to watch because of Seinfeld, and it's so bad. It's amazing. It's like The Room, but from the 60s and sci-fi. It's pretty great. Let's see. Okay, I think... Am I Canadian? Yes, I am from Canada. I have a Canadian Beanie Baby on my other bookshelf over there, which I cannot get up to show you right now. Oh, when Jackie got her pilot's license, what was the cost and what was the adjustment for today's dollars? I can answer that. I need an inflation calculator, though, real quick. So Jackie got her license in 1932 in inflation calculator. I love that it pops up right away. This website pops up right away because I have to do this all the time. Oh, it might be in here actually. I put adjusted values for a handful of things, including costs like let's see. Oh, I didn't do it on this one apparently. Maybe not. Inflation calculator. It cost Jackie $495 in 1932 to get her pilot's license. It's loading. Let's see. All right, 1932. And we're gonna. Oh, come on. My browsers have been really wonky lately. It's driving me a little bit crazy. My computer's been finicky for a long time now. That would have been about a little under $10,000 by today's standards. So, yeah, it's expensive. way more expensive now, actually. $10,000 is cheap for a pilot license from the last time I looked it up. Okay. Where did I get the Pete Conrad action figure? A friend sent it to me. So I have no idea. I'm assuming eBay. Would I like to go to Star City and try the cosmonaut training program? I would love to. I've never been to Russia. I would love to see Russia. My family's from Russia, actually. Part of my family. Don't speak Russian. Don't have a way to go. One of these days I'll make it. Don't know. Asking for a friend, will I be doing anything about vintage clothing from the 50s and 60s? At some point, yeah, that's part of the broadening of vintage space. There's a lot of vintage sort of style and fashion stuff that I really like. So eventually I'll be doing something. I've been kind of thinking about some interesting tie-ins to kind of tech, because it's all connected. It's all a rich tapestry. So we'll be getting we'll be getting to some of that stuff at some point. Have I ever been to Wallops Island? Oh my gosh, to the Chincoteague, Virginia, where the NASA launch sites are? No, I have not. I've been out to Goddard. I think that's the only spacey thing I've done in that part of the country. Explore map. I wish Frame for Space had an index. I forgot to ask about that. Me too. I'm gonna see if we can get that for the paperback. Actually, I went to look something up and I'm like, well, how about that? I have the benefit of having the document, so I can just I do a search function in my own copy of it whenever I need to look something up. That really does happen. Okay. I think that's gonna do it for me for today. Auction for a signed copy possible. I just don't have a way of getting right now, because it's hard to mail things. I can't get the books to send. So I've thought about maybe doing something, because a lot of people are asking about signed books, but honestly it's such a pain. It's so hard to do the signed books. I'm not planning on anything, but if I do come up with a way to do it, I will of course be letting you guys know. Okay, I'm gonna call it there because I have some stuff I have to get done this afternoon, and it's been an hour and a half. Thank you guys for listening. Oh, did I ever go to JPL? Yeah, I live really close to JPL, so I've been out there 5 or 6 times. It's very cool. If you are ever in the LA area, JPL does public tours. I'm just going to blatantly promote JPL's public tours once it's open again. I think you can just call in and ask, but they do 3 a day, and it's so cool. If you can, give it 3 hours and try to go. It's well worth it. Okay. Here's the book. This is what we've been talking about for the last hour and a half. Thank you guys for hanging out with me and listening to my venting, ranting, whatever you want to call it. This book is available on Amazon. The link should be in the description. You can also get it through any of your local bookstore. Oh, Chris, thank you so much for your donation. And Pete will very much appreciate that. And Daniel, thank you so much for that donation. Au revoir. So it's available on Amazon, local bookstores. A lot of them are doing curbside pickup right now. They're sending locally. So it is a very good time to support your local bookstores because they are the ones that are going to be in the most trouble right now. I'm just a huge fan of bookstores, so consider that. Also available as an ebook as well as an audiobook, as read by me, I promise. I speak much more slowly in the audiobook. The entire time, the engineer who I was recording with kept telling me to use my pauses. I told him he should just have that crocheted on the wall because he said it so much. Other things to tell you guys. Okay, so this is, of course, the Vintage Space. This is my YouTube channel. We will be doing the last installment. Next week, I know we are talking about scientist astronauts, which means I have to go do some serious digging into some stuff, because this is actually something that's not in the book because it just didn't fit, but it's a really interesting kind of conclusion to the question of women in space and kind of wraps things up a little bit. So we're going to be talking scientist astronauts in the 1960s, and that's going to be the last on the virtual book tour because I want to get back to doing some other kinds of content. So we're going to be getting back to more traditional the Vintage Space episodes. They're going to be longer kind of thought pieces because I want to play around with some bigger ideas. So don't know the schedule yet, but we'll find out together how quickly they get done. In the meantime, definitely subscribe here if you are new to get notifications of when I go live next time, as well as future video uploads. If you are here and you want to become a member, I'm currently working on some new member perks. I'm still figuring it out because I'm new to this, but I'm working on setting up a Discord for members, as well as this ports over to Patreon as well. So make things equal on both. There will be a Discord for discussions and figuring out some other things to do with that. So if you do want to consider becoming a member, the information's here. If you would like to consider joining my Patreon, any help does mean a whole lot, really does. And those of you who are members or who are patrons, thank you so much for your ongoing support. It allows me to do what I do. You can also follow me on Twitter for all the updates of everything. Just Amy Shearer Title. Facebook, Amy Shearer Title. Instagram, Amy Shearer Title. It's all mostly the same content. Twitter is probably where I'm most active. But yeah, for all things space and Pete and whatever else related. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm on Cameo now. This is a new venture for me. We're seeing how it goes. If you or someone you know needs a little pick-me-up fun space message, you can actually book me on Cameo now. There's a Linktree link in the description that has everything, including a link to my new mailing list, which I haven't actually used yet, but if you'd like to sign up, you can get updates from me once I have something worth updating you guys on. I think that's it. I think that's everything. Am I forgetting anything? I don't know. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Pete says hi. He went back to sleeping. When I started, his head was up, and now it's just back down. So thank you guys so much for hanging out today. I hope you learned a little bit of something, or just started thinking a little bit more broadly about kind of how, it's when we talk about traditional or historical women in space different than modern, and there's a lot of viewpoints taken into consideration every time. I hope it was at least entertaining, at least a little bit interesting. And I hope to see you guys on the next one. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.